excuse me, that we don't just survive all of this craziness that's going on, but how we thrive in it as well, and how we thrive as a community. And given the work that has to take place to ensure that your membership is vital to us fulfilling that goal. And that, by us, I mean TechBirmingham and you all as well. You all are a part of this. So thanks for the support. We appreciate the future and the continued support. And final thanks to Lydia Dick. She came to Birmingham, Venture for America, I believe. Is that correct, Lydia? Yeah, VFA. Going way back, I remember when that was just a spaghetti idea on the wall, and some wonderful people came around and really made it happen. And so Lydia is proof positive of the positive impact, part of the redundancy of that program and how vital it is to Birmingham. So just super honored and privileged that she's decided to join us and share some of her tips and insights regarding Zoom. Everybody's using it now. So cannot be more timely. And with that said, I'll go ahead and say thanks and turn it over to you, Lydia.
Thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate that kind introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Now, can everyone see everything? Great. All right. Now, just a note, I can't see the Q&A when I'm in the presenter mode. Unfortunately, when I click on it, it doesn't pop up. So Christina, if you could just make sure to relay any questions to me as they pop up throughout the presentation, I'd really appreciate it. All right, everyone. So hello. Thank you so much for having me. Dion, Christina, Rebecca, I absolutely love TechBirmingham, and I'm so glad that I can be here today to talk to you all about a topic that I think we all find a little bit intimidating right now, which is not just hosting the regular old Zoom meeting, but hosting big, scary virtual events using Zoom. So I understand there's other platforms, but for the purpose of today, we're going to be talking mainly about Zoom, since that's the most popular platform that folks are using right now. All right, so a little bit about me. So as Dion mentioned, I did come to Birmingham as a Venture for America Fellow, which is, for those of you who don't know, Venture for America is a workforce development and economic development nonprofit that seeks to place talent in up-and-coming US cities to help bolster the startup ecosystems there. And Birmingham is a VFA city, so if you're looking for talent, especially smart, savvy, students who are stressed out of college, it's a good place to source talent. So as far as what I do, I work at the University of Alabama at Birmingham underneath the Harbert Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, running the Anvil Student Startup Bootcamp program. Now that's a lot of words, so they're all on the screen for you right there. And with the Anvil, my job is to run a 10-week program for undergraduate, graduate, and PhD students who want to become entrepreneurs. And so we bring in guest speakers and mentors. We have breakout sessions. We do site visits, or we did site visits to different locations around town so they could really get immersed in the Birmingham entrepreneurial ecosystem and hopefully launch their companies to spur economic development in the region. Now, as you all know, around March 13th, that formidable Friday the 13th, everything got moved to online. We all were told to go home, social distancing, work from home, and so we all had to quickly adapt to this online format. Now, I was in the middle of our cohort. I was like week 7 of our Student Startup Bootcamp. So suddenly I was faced with, I had a week to make sure all of our guest speakers who were planned, since our curriculum is primarily taught by guest speakers and coaches, that all of them knew how to use Zoom. We had the right format. We had the right tools that we needed to have engaging online environments. And I want to be very clear in saying that I am not a Zoom expert, right? I am just like many of all of you, I am very new to Zoom. So I'm hoping that throughout this lecture, all of you will contribute what you've learned, and we can really share as a group tips and tricks. But with that said, I'd say the one area of expertise, if I did have to say I have an area of expertise, I teach college students, which I'm assuming many folks in this room have had the privilege of being a college student. And when you're a college student, staying engaged is already difficult, right? When you're sleep deprived, when you have a part-time job, when you're trying to get assignments done, right? So the biggest uphill battle that I've been fighting is how can I keep my students engaged? How can I keep them interested and wanting to come back to class time and time again when they're not getting course credit to be in the program, right? So that means that my presentations have to be engaging and that my events have to be interactive. So that's gonna be really the core of this whole presentation. All right, so to start things off, thank you, Christina, so much for sort of introducing this, but if you know how to use the applause function, could you please select the clapping function now? So, is that a function that we can use in this particular setting? Is there a reaction button?
There is. It's on the side. If you look at if you pull up the participants, I don't know if you can see the participants when you're presenting, but they will raise their hands.
They've been changing it. I was just in a webinar the other day where I was able to see it, but great. Well, if you don't know how to use the reaction buttons, here's a quick little tutorial. If you have the old version of Zoom, you can click more and click the applause button. If you have the newer version, you can always just select reactions and use the applause or the thumbs up button. All right. So I want to start things off by hearing some anecdotes from all of you. So obviously everyone and their mother has been on Zoom calls nonstop, and I know you all have blooper stories. So I would love to hear a couple from all of you.
So if you have a blooper story, go ahead and raise your hand and I will promote you to a panelist so you can share your story with the group. Well, I'll share one that is kind of funny. I was about to do a Zoom call with Dion. So luckily it wasn't like the greater TechBirmingham community, but as I was doing my audio checks, I looked in the background and all three of my younger children were running by stark naked. They had been playing in the mud and stripped down on the porch and were running behind me covered in mud, naked. And so luckily that didn't get posted on anything. And then, oh, here we go. We've got one from Katie. Let me find you, Katie.
Christina, that story is so funny and terrifying.
It was, yeah. Okay, so Katie, oops, no, it was a mistake. Oh, I thought we were gonna get something juicy. Yeah, and then another, we've had a couple mishaps, but yeah, nothing that is permanent.
Yeah, no, Christina, I think that's such a funny example that you bring up. And it's true that sometimes you just can't control things in the background. And I think we've all seen the videos and the memes of people who forget that they're on Zoom and they forget they have their camera on, they forget to put on pants. That happened with one of our students. They were just in their boxer shorts. So I know that Zoom is definitely prone to having those embarrassing moments. Any other Zoom blooper stories? Any fears, any concerns from all of you out there in hosting a large Zoom event?
Rebecca. Okay.
So I was on a Zoom call that was semi-professional the other day, and I was trying to explain something, and I look up, and my friend's girlfriend is changing clothes. He didn't move his laptop, and I guess didn't know she was getting out of the shower, and it was like, I'm just going to pretend like I didn't see that and go on. So there's my Zoom blooper story.
Well, and then of course, a couple weeks ago, Zoom is always changing their settings. And so a few weeks ago when we had a guest on, he was showing screens, and somehow when I was trying to do picture-in-picture mode, which they don't have anymore, I kicked him off the screen share. So all we could see was him talking. And so finally somebody private messaged me and told me that they couldn't see his screen. So that was our biggest blunder so far.
I think that's I think that's a really great example of one of the things that can go wrong when you have one solo person who's running the meeting who is both presenting and trying to monitor everything that's going on. And that's something I'm hopefully going to talk about and address a little bit later about how you can utilize volunteers and utilize other individuals to help you run an effective meeting. Another example that I want to give from UAB before we move on is we had a big problem at UAB, as in many academic institutions. A lot of you have probably heard about something called Zoom bombing. And that's when nefarious individuals, probably just bored teenagers, log on to publicly posted Zoom calls and do what bored teenagers do, which is post inappropriate content. Sometimes they, inappropriate content that's meant to embarrass individuals, racially charged content. So that was a big concern for UAB. And so they immediately locked that down by telling us how to adjust our Zoom settings, automatically setting some settings. Now, every single meeting that you create through UAB, you have to have a meeting password. But on my end, that meant I also had to do a lot of research for our big event, our final demo day Blazer Innovation Challenge, when our students were pitching their ideas, to make sure we didn't have a Zoom bomber pop on. So that's another thing I'm going to talk about, is how to prevent Zoom bombing, because I can't think of anything more terrifying than, you know, speaking to the void and already being in this terrifying position of speaking during a Zoom event in front of a ton of people, and then having somebody jump on and try and humiliate you. So we're going to talk about how to avoid that. And avoid some of these other bloopers that were mentioned. All right. So yes, we're gonna talk about avoiding bloopers, how to be prepared, and how to keep things engaging. So I also want to hear some of the pros and cons that you guys have noticed about Zoom thus far. So let's start with the cons. What don't you like about Zoom? What drives you absolutely nuts?
And you can either pop those in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I can allow you to talk.
And if you just want to drop them in the chat, I can read them out loud as well. I'm assuming you all wouldn't be here unless you're interested in hosting a large Zoom event and you've been to bad Zoom events. And I know that we all probably have at this point.
So I'll start. So some of the pros is, you know, the user is very user-friendly for the most part. But I think that's also one of the cons, because it was so user-friendly, it was so easy to infiltrate and do things that weren't always appropriate for meetings. One of the cons recently, and it's also a good thing, but they keep making a lot of updates. And so it's hard to stay on top of what features are still there. You finally get used to having these features and getting the lay of the land, and then they change it. So let's see, Melvia, she just wants to become more proficient with learning how to use Zoom.
Great.
Thanks for that, Melvia. And anybody else, if they've got some comments, pros, cons, or just anything else that they'd like to share.
Ben Branch says, when your screen is somehow minimized and is hidden, you can't hear but can't mute, can't turn it off, etc. Happened just a second ago. When your screen somehow, is that the speaker's screen or your own screen?
So I think I know what he's talking about. Sometimes the Zoom screen. So sometimes, you know, like when you do full screen mode.
Yeah.
And then the buttons are somewhat sensitive, and somehow you exit out of the screen mode, and then you lose track of where your screen is.
Yeah.
The Zoom screen.
That drives me nuts about Zoom's UX is that the bar, especially if you're a panelist or a organizer, when you share your screen, the bar that's normally at the bottom of the screen moves to the top of the screen. And sometimes it disappears, so you have to hover over it. And so I feel like Zoom has been updating that and editing the UX, and it drives me nuts every time. Anything else?
Sean mentions that a pro is the breakout rooms.
Absolutely, yeah.
Love that feature.
So to address, I definitely love breakout rooms, and I think that is one of the advantages of the Zoom tech. But to address some of the cons first, like I mentioned before, a really great article that I read recently from Scott Rosenberg from Axios, he's the editor for the technology section. He wrote an article about Zoom fatigue. And that's the effect where suddenly all these meetings that we used to have in a combination of online and over the phone have all moved to Zoom. And every meeting is now a Zoom meeting, including your happy hours, including catching up with friends and family. And not only is Zoom inviting somebody into your home so they can see your physical space. So there's anxiety around that. There's also anxiety about having a spotlight on your face and getting the immediate feedback of seeing yourself mess up on screen when you're presenting. So there are all kinds of stressors that go along with hosting a Zoom meeting and having many, many Zoom meetings, which is why one of the first points is to always carefully consider where to host your meeting and whether you want to use Zoom for an event. However, I also want to address some pros that you may or may not have thought about, which is that your audience can be a lot larger with Zoom. You can reach many, many more people, right? With a meeting, you can reach up to 500 people. With a webinar, you can reach up to 10,000. And so with the scope, you can think much, much larger. There's also a lot of really great interactive features, as we mentioned. There's polling, there's Q&A, there's raising your hands. There's other things that we can't actually do as effectively in a live event. So I think there's also ways you can leverage Zoom to have more interactive and interesting events. All right. So the first part of this talk, I'm going to talk about organizing. So specifically for if you're considering organizing a large Zoom event, some things you should take into consideration. Additionally, I want to point out that Christina's going to send out a handout that I've made, just a Google Doc with a bunch of links to really useful articles, as well as a speaker checklist. So hopefully that will be a good tool to take away from this. So don't feel like you have to scramble and take down a bunch of notes. All the links to the articles and a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about will be available in the slides and available in the notes. All right, so there's sort of 4 things that I want to address when it comes to organizing. And that's the platform that you're planning on using, your schedule, the advertising, your advertising strategy, as well as risk management. So the first thing to know is the platform. So your first choice when you're deciding you want to have a big Zoom event, you're like, this sounds like a great idea. Lydia's totally right. There's cool things that you can do with a Zoom event. The first choice that you're presented with, do I want to host a webinar or do I want to host a Zoom meeting? Those are the 2 options through Zoom. And when I first saw the page, they have like a little explainer on like what's the difference between a Zoom webinar and a meeting. And I was trying to decide which category I fell into. And I'm gonna be honest, I was completely confused. I had no idea which one was correct. So I kind of want to break this down and make it simple for you to give you a good rule of thumb for which one to choose. So for a webinar is really great if you are, 1, broadcasting to more than 500 people, because you cannot do that with a meeting. So if you have a really, really big audience. And 2, if you want to sort of limit or simplify the actions of your audience. So there's a few different like key features that you can't do with a webinar that you can do with a meeting. And for example, one of those is breakout rooms. Somebody mentioned breakout rooms earlier. That's something that you can really only do with a meeting. And that means that there's a lot of more interactivity that you can have between participants themselves within a meeting. As you can see right now in this webinar, you can see the panelists, you can see me, you can see Christina, you can see a picture of Dion and Rebecca, but you don't see all of the participants. So particularly from a business standpoint, webinars work great for webinars. They work great for when you don't really want your audience members to see each other or interact with each other as much as you would in a meeting. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't host a big event using Zoom meetings, because Zoom meetings can host up to 500 people. However, it does lend itself better for when you want more interactivity and interactions with the participants in the meeting. So I show those little photos as examples. But just as a rule of thumb, a webinar you want to use when you want limited audience interaction and when you're going to have a lot of participants. Additionally, a webinar sometimes costs more money for your organization depending on what plan that you currently have with Zoom, but they can be really expensive. When we were looking to purchase an extra token for a webinar, I believe it was around $1,000 through UAB. And to me, that just wasn't worth it, particularly when I really liked the interactive features of the meeting. Because we wanted our event to be interactive, we wanted it to be a networking event. So if you want to have like a networking aspect to your events, you might consider doing a meeting instead. And it was completely free underneath our Zoom subscription. Any questions on webinar versus meeting?
We'll come back if anyone
All right.
has some later.
Again, feel free to keep dropping those in the chat. All right, your next task as an organizer is to then come up with your event schedule. And this is the classic 5 whys: who, what, when, where, why, you know, who's your audience, what content will be most appealing for them, is Zoom the right platform? But I like to add a couple other core questions into this equation as well, which is the 2 C's. Could this be an email? Could you send a recording, right? If the content of your Zoom meeting could be delivered in a recording or in an email, if it doesn't require interaction, if you don't expect a lot of questions, if it's more instructional, you might consider just sending a video or just sending a PDF document with the notes. Make sure you have a good reason for the meeting that you're scheduling. As I mentioned, we're all starting to get Zoom fatigue. Additionally, think about how you might be able to boost engagement during the event. How can you make it more interactive? How can you replicate some of the aspects of a live event utilizing all those Zoom tools and making sure that you learn them? Because Zoom, and we'll get into this a little bit later when we talk about engagement, but Zoom has a lot of tools to help you engage with your audience. Additionally, how might you use other virtual platforms? I recently participated in a hackathon event that utilized Discord, which is similar to Slack, or any online messaging platform. And what they did is they opened the chat a week before the event. So you could talk to the other event participants ahead of time in various channels, depending on your interests. Then when it came to the actual time of the event, when we all logged onto the Zoom call, I was like, oh my gosh, there's that person from the chat and that person. And that was that was a nationwide event. And I would have never interacted with those individuals if it hadn't been for that chat feature. So when you're thinking I'm hosting an online event, think of it as not just Zoom. There are many, many Zoom integrations, and that's something that we'll talk about again later. All right, next is advertising. So biggest note when it comes to advertising is to think bigger. Normally when you're scheduling an event, especially locally, especially if it's a smaller event, you're probably only thinking about your usual channels, advertising through local organizations. However, since you're hosting your event online, you of course have the option to make it a global event, quite literally. Our Blazer Innovation Challenge wasn't really a huge event, but we had participants from all over the world participating in that event. We had folks from Oman, we had folks from Canada, and it was really exciting to see that. And again, that's one of the advantages of having an online event. However, that also means that in your advertising, you have to think big. So looking for those forums and channels that you can use that can reach broader audiences across the US or across the world that you want to tap into. Also for advertising, I recommend some of these are app integrations that you can use with Zoom to help capture leads for your organization. So if you run a business and you're hosting a webinar, you might look into using Marketo or I don't know how to pronounce these. I'm so sorry, guys. I've only ever read them. Pardot. So if I'm completely off the mark, just let me know in the chat. HubSpot, and then of course Eventbrite. And Eventbrite has been especially on top of making sure they integrate really well with Zoom. I would really recommend hosting your event on Eventbrite because that way it can be discovered basically across the world, which is really interesting. All right, now finally the big one, which is risk management. And so I sort of parse this out into 4 categories: meeting settings, doing a dress rehearsal, using a team, and having a backup plan. So starting with meeting settings. So this part is boring, so I'm sorry. Try and pay attention. This will be available to you later. The first is your meeting ID. You really want to make sure that you generate an automatic meeting ID and don't use your personal meeting ID. If you share out your personal meeting ID, that means anyone and everyone can use that ID to hop onto a meeting with you. So you want to be very careful and just have them generate a random meeting ID for each meeting. Additionally, you want to make sure that you generate a meeting password. And then don't share that password publicly, right? Don't just create a meeting password and be like, good, we're secure, and then share the password and the link on Facebook. Basically what that means is that anybody who's on Facebook or anybody who's on the social networking platform that you choose to post your event on can log on to the event. So another barrier that you can have for anybody who's trying to Zoom bomb your event or potentially just drop in and wreak havoc is have them have to register and then type in the meeting password. And apparently that's a really good way because Zoom bombers are lazy and that's not something that they're looking to do is actually register for an event. It also makes them more traceable. As far as the video goes, you can change these settings how you like, but a lot of people choose to have the participant, at least the participant video off. That also can be nicer for participants sometimes, especially when we're in Zoom meetings all day. It can be nice to just kind of relax and not have to think about yourself being on camera. All right, again, for meeting settings, you might want to mute participants upon entry, enable a waiting room, and record the meeting automatically, either on your local computer or on the cloud. Your local computer, you have it forever. On the cloud, it disappears in 30 days. Okay, I'm starting to go through this a little bit more quickly, so I still want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. But feel free to keep dropping questions in, and Christina, make sure you wave at me if you see any. All right, so some other meeting settings. So the surest way, the most surefire way to lock down your meeting and make sure it's secure is once you start the meeting and everybody you want to be in the meeting is there, enable block meeting. And that will basically mean you shut the door and nobody else can get in. And that is the most surefire way to make sure that your meeting is completely secure. Now, I can see why there's many reasons why you might not want to enable that function, but if you are particularly worried, and especially if you have a very select guest list, that's always an option. All right, do a dress rehearsal, preferably with wonderful costumes and Lydia Dick. But in actuality, you really should do a dress rehearsal. It's not just for your middle school musical. Dress rehearsals are actually really, really useful when it comes to Zoom. And the reason for that is because you might think, well, I've hosted events like this in the past. We invite a couple speakers, right? Why should we have to do a dress rehearsal? Well, in the case of Zoom, there are so many variables. You've literally multiplied the variables by the number of participants that you have in the meeting. And so for each of your speakers, they have their own environment. They might not know everything that you know about organizing and hosting Zoom events. So doing a dress rehearsal where you can see everything happen, I'm telling you, you're gonna learn so much about what can and will go wrong during the actual event. And on that note, you also wanna make sure your speakers know what to expect. So really quickly, I'm gonna navigate away from this and show you guys an example. So for all of our students who are participating in the Blazer Innovation Challenge, which was a pitch competition event, we gave them a packet. And I did this to make it really, really easy to give them all the information they needed to know all in one place. And so in this document, I included the event link and password. So they couldn't tell me, hey, the link's not working. They all have access to it in this document. It has the time they're supposed to be there, which I always recommend having folks arrive early to a meeting. We actually opened up our event a full hour beforehand so that students could test their slides and test their tech in the actual event an hour before when no one else was logged on. Additionally, providing contextual information here is good. So we provided information on the judges. If you have an event with a lot of panelists, providing LinkedIn bios on the other panelists is always a pro. As far as the event schedule, we also indicated for our participants when they would be speaking and what their specific actions were and what their transitions were. And remember, we already did a test run, so they already had this internalized from actually doing it. This is just an extra reminder. Again, repetition is one of the best things that you can do. So as you can see, we had, for example, for each student that was pitching, they would pitch for their team, and then afterwards they would invite their team up to each introduce themselves. And the reason for that is because if you're hosting a Zoom meeting, you cannot see someone unless they speak, right? Because that's when the Zoom puts a spotlight on them. So keep that in mind if you're hosting a Zoom meeting. A good rule of thumb, if you're gonna be introducing somebody, they should speak. All right, I'm gonna go back to the presentation. That packet, one thing I didn't show in it is a checklist. So we also provided a checklist of things that the speaker should do ahead of the event, including updating the tech on their computer, testing their mic and speakers, setting up their environment. It's really, really in depth. I'm actually sharing that with all of you following this event, and I think it's a really great tool to send to any speaker ahead of any event and to use yourself. All right, use a team. This is one of the biggest tips I have throughout this entire presentation. One of the biggest mistakes you can make with hosting a really big online event is trying to do it all yourself. So you organizing it, trying to be the moderator, trying to be the go-to person for any sort of technical issues, trying to let everybody into the meeting who's waiting in the waiting room. If you try and do all of these things, you will end up missing something, because humans are just bad multitaskers. It's just a reality of it. And so one nice feature that Zoom has is that you can have unlimited co-hosts. You can have as many people as you want helping you with your Zoom call, and you can delegate these tasks. So for example, it depends on what kind of event you're hosting, but think about the kinds of activities that need to go on during your event. So during the Blazer Innovation Challenge, I knew that we were probably going to have people who wouldn't be able to find the meeting password, even though we emailed it out 3 times. We were probably going to have people who, I knew that we were probably going to have people who are going to have problems like technical issues logging on because their computer wasn't updating or was restarting and they just have questions, right? I knew that, and this was from doing test runs. That's how we learned all these things. I knew that we need to make sure that all of our students were in the room. We need to take attendance, right? We need to make sure that all the speakers we're going to have are going to be in the room. We needed to create breakout rooms, and that actually had to be done physically. Somebody had to create all the breakout rooms among 80 people. And I also knew that I was moderating and speaking, and that's 100% where my focus needed to be. So I recruited 2 individuals to delegate those tasks to, who did it throughout the meeting. So I had one person who was like a bouncer, and they were checking everybody in, they were checking in attendance, they were making sure as they were letting people in who were in the waiting room that none of them had sort of obvious, you can change your name on Zoom, and none of them had sort of like obvious, expletives in their name or something like that, where they're clearly not trying to enter the meeting seriously, something like that. So we had individuals who were checking people in, and that was a lifesaver. I even actually, one of the person on my tech team was in my physical home, which I think was great. If you have a competent teenager, they can do it. If you have a spouse, they can totally do it. I've linked the instructions we gave our tech team in the notes, because I also importantly told this team, it gave this team specific instructions on what to do if there is a Zoom bombing event, right? If somebody tries to disrupt the meeting. And so all 3 of us were trained on the protocol of what to do. So by doing that, you minimize the chances of one of those events even occurring. And then if it does, you have 3 people instead of 1 that are looking out for it. So being specific with the roles, figuring out everything that you need through practice runs, and then delegating is so important. Any questions on any of this that I've talked about?
We have a question about registration.
Okay.
Or more of a comment. Sean Slavin says, when using registration, we usually turn on automatic approval, but also configure to have an email to send to the host every time a new person registers. That allows you to manage attendance by exception. That's a great tip, to keep, I guess, control your attendance list.
Yeah, particularly if you know everybody who should be registering, if you're familiar with the community. Yeah. Any other comments? These tips are...
That was a great tip. We have a question about how to access and share recordings or record the meetings.
Sure. So I think I have this in my slides.
Sorry to jump ahead.
Yeah, no problem at all. This is actually behind. So in the meeting options, when you're creating the meeting on Zoom, it's in the sort of bottom section. At the very bottom, you'll see an option to record the meeting automatically. You can either record the meeting on the local computer or in the cloud. You can also record the meeting once you're in the meeting. So if you're an event host, there's a button to click record, and you need to make sure that's recording. That was the one slip up that we had during our Blazer Innovation Challenge, was that I thought it was set up to automatically record, but our tech team paused it while we were having a conversation at the beginning, and it never got started again. So you need to be careful of that. So yes, but you can record, and you can either record on your local computer or on the cloud. Just keep in mind that the cloud recording expires in 30 days.
Yes, and then you can take that recording, and so in the instance of Tech Birmingham, we take that link that Zoom sends us, we edit it a little bit, and then we post it on our Tech Birmingham YouTube channel. So
Awesome.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's another plus of Zoom meetings, is that your events automatically become other forms of content that you can use to further promote your organization. And you can use one Zoom meeting, you can record a podcast, you can have a video on a YouTube channel, and you can have a blog post. So think about how you can utilize and leverage a Zoom meeting in these different ways to amplify your organization's platform. All right, so similar to the speakers, I also created a tech team packet that basically goes over each person's individual roles. I'm not going to click on it for the sake of time to show you, but Christina will be sharing it afterwards. And then finally, having a backup plan. So if something does go wrong, know what your plan of action is. So if there is somebody who comes onto the event who's being disruptive, or if somebody just forgets to unmute their mic, you always have the option of being able to mute them yourselves or remove them. And again, I recommend having this role delegated to a specific person who's focused on that throughout the meeting or the event. You can also, if you click more underneath at the very bottom of this panel, you can see how to, you can play the enter exit chime, and usually that's only audible to the host, but you can always disable that because I know it gets annoying. You can also allow participants, check the box to allow participants to unmute themselves. So if you have a problem of like a couple people continually unmuting themselves, you can always check that box. And again, this is really more relevant for Zoom meetings than Zoom webinars. All right, that was a lot. I actually have a whole nother section. So should I keep going, or does anybody have any more questions thus far?
We do have a question from Becky Cole. She asks, if I create settings for a meeting ID, but someone else ends up hosting as the alternate host, will the settings stay with the meeting, or will they revert to the settings of the person who ended up hosting?
Wow, that's a great question. This is why doing a test run is great. There are all kinds of specific scenarios like this. And again, I'm not the Zoom encyclopedia, but with questions like that, testing it out is the best way to know for sure, because Zoom is also changing their settings on a day-to-day basis. So that's something I would test out just to be 100% sure. The other thing that you can do is also send over the settings, like screenshots of the settings, to the other person that you're inviting to host, so they can make sure that their settings reflect those changes.
All right, show of hands if you would like for Lydia to continue with some other tips and tricks, or if you would like to ask some more questions. Okay, we're getting a lot of hand raises, so keep going.
All right, great. So part 2 is presenting. Diving right in. So there's 3 main points I want to hit, which is preparation, presentation, and then finally engagement. So as far as preparation, you want to use a checklist, you want to practice, you want to check your tech, and you want to check your environment. I'm going to dive into each of those. So we have all experienced forgetting to mute our mic. You've definitely done it personally. You've definitely heard it. The other day, I was on a Zoom call with my office, and somebody, I swear, was eating chips like periodically throughout the entire meeting. And like, you never knew when it was going to happen, but at some point there was going to be somebody munching on some chips. So we've all experienced this, and we all know that we're not supposed to do it, right? We all know we should keep ourselves on mute when we're not talking or if we're in a noisy environment, but it still happens. Which is why I love the saying that says forgetting to mute your mic is the new reply all, because it totally is. And what both of these things have in common is that they're reflective of all of the minute details that we have to memorize in today's technology-driven age, right? There's so many little actions that we have to memorize that aren't necessarily intuitive. And I always take sort of a design perspective. I imagine a lot of you who are technologists also have a design perspective, and thinking that the problem isn't the user, the problem is the environment, right? The problem is the technology. So what can we do to sort of create a new environment or make it easier for participants to remember these things? So as an organizer, here's a couple things you can do. One is provide a checklist to your presenters and a packet of information ahead of time. Again, I showed that to you. I think it's a really great tool. You shouldn't just assume that everybody knows what to do. Additionally, when somebody's done speaking and you know that they should go on mute, especially if you're a moderator, and tell your moderators to do this, just say, thank you so much. You can go ahead and put yourself on mute now. Or when you're introducing somebody, say, and next we'll have Dion, please unmute yourself. Make sense? But checklists are a really great tool. There's a reason why they're used by the Air Force, the Army, and surgeons. They're the best way to remember lots of minute details. Next, in terms of preparation, you want to make sure that you prepare your tech, right? Nothing sucks the energy out of a meeting like having to wait 15 minutes because somebody's computer's restarting because they haven't updated it recently. Same thing with the version of Zoom. So if you know that you're presenting, make sure that the day before, you update your computer and update your latest version of Zoom. And again, that's included in the checklist that I'll be sharing afterwards. You can also join a test meeting. Test meetings are wonderful. You can just type join test meeting into Google and Zoom lets anybody do it. And what's awesome about doing a test meeting or recording yourself in a meeting is that you can literally simulate the exact environment and experience that you're going to have as a presenter when it comes to actually presenting. So this is something I highly recommend for any of you who are anticipating doing a lot of Zoom public speaking, because it really gets you comfortable with speaking to the void, which I know was an adjustment for me. All right, so next is, this is just a screenshot of what it looks like when you're testing your computer audio and your mic. So when you click join Zoom meeting for any meeting, you can always test your speaker and microphone ahead of time, and that's how you do it. All right, next for your presentation. I love this meme. I'll give you a second to really let that sink in. And I love it for so many reasons, and we're gonna use it to explain some do's and don'ts for presenting. So let's start with our friend, the lizard in the bottom right-hand corner. So what do you guys notice about the lizard and how he's presenting himself in this Zoom meeting? Do I see any comments popping up?
You can go ahead and type your observations in the chat box.
Right.
Not centered.
Yeah, he's not centered. He's off in like the corner over here. What else?
If he was using a virtual background, he would be part of the background.
Right, right. So he's totally blending into the wall behind him, right? They're almost the same color.
Max says he's a wee bit on the low side.
He's very low on the screen. All right, and what do you notice about our friend? What do you notice about the other guys and their position on the screen?
That ceiling fan is a little distracting with Mr. Hamster.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the hamster, there are two things that really pop out to me.
Sean points out the backlighting.
Right, right. So there's backlighting. Having bright backlighting can really distract individuals and also hurt their eyes, give them a headache. So be mindful of what your background looks like. If you have a bright window behind you, it can do the same thing. You want to make sure that you're not backlit, you have a good light in front of you. Anything else?
Sean also mentions that we have a nice view up his nose.
Exactly. So y'all can't see this, but I actually have my computer resting on a shoebox. You don't have to have fancy tech. There are lots of stuff that I've seen advertised for having nice things to elevate your computer, but making sure it's a little bit elevated if you're working on a laptop can prevent people from staring up your nose the whole meeting. One more thing I want to mention, unless there's anything else in the chat. With the hamster and the dog and the fish, you'll notice that their faces all look freakishly distorted and hilarious in the context of this photo, but it's actually just the nature of a camera lens, that if you are really, really up close to a camera, it's going to make your face distort and look, make the middle of your face look larger than it actually is. So with that, you want to make sure when you're on a Zoom call I like to play by the rule of thirds. So where my shoulders are, I should take about 1/3 of the screen. And I find that leaves me in a place where I'm not quite as distorted. And it just makes me feel a little bit better about not looking like our fish friend here. All right. So those are some tips on presenting. My other biggest tip on presenting. Again, I'll let this sink in. So we've all experienced witnessing a professor or witnessing a lecture in which the person is reading off their slides the whole gosh darn time. And nothing irks me more, especially when you're trying to do a Zoom call and you're trying to keep people engaged, right? If you're gonna be sharing your screen, it better be adding to what you're saying, not detracting from it. So make sure that when you're presenting slides, one, the text should not be smaller than 30-point font, right? You should try and keep it as large as possible because if you're using any smaller font than that, it means it probably shouldn't be something that's written on the slide. It should be something that you're saying, and you should have an image behind you that's supporting that. Otherwise, you're forcing people to read slides, which draws away from your presentation and also makes it less engaging. All right, so finally, engagement. There's 3 aspects that I want to talk about when it comes to engagement, and I'm coming right at the end here, so I'm going to try and go through these quickly. The first is prepare, next is the leverage tool, and finally to set the tone early. So when it comes to preparation, again, this goes right back to the beginning. A lot of people are like, how on earth do I make my Zoom calls more engaging? Well, one of the biggest things that you can do is ask yourself, why am I doing this to begin with? And what content can I really provide my audience that they're really going to care about and they're really going to resonate with and it's really going to be interesting for them? So, Mr. Ryan, it's also worth thinking about, what does my audience look like? What are their interests? What sort of things are going to appeal to them, right? So, for example, if they're a younger crowd, they might work better with memes. If they're a tech crowd, they might resonate more with that. So think about who is your audience and what's going to be most engaging for them. All right. Next is practicing a lot and making sure that your tech's all up to date. That's something I mentioned earlier, preparing as a guest speaker, but truly nothing will sap your energy and sap your engagement more than not doing these things. If you don't prepare ahead of time and your tech crashes right ahead of an event, it can be very distracting and really suck the energy out of the room. Leveraging tools. So there's lots of Zoom app integrations and lots of tools that Zoom provides to make your meetings more engaging. Some of my favorites are, if you're in a meeting, my favorite is breakout rooms. It makes me feel like this magical being who can just pop into these different rooms. Basically how it works is you can just split all of your participants out into what it sounds like, breakout rooms, and then you can magically pull them all back. And you can drop, if you're the event host, you can drop questions in or prompts into basically into a chat box that goes out to all of the breakout rooms, and you can zoom around and visit them. And that was my favorite thing. It was the closest thing to virtual networking that I've experienced thus far using any online platform. So I really enjoyed that. It's a great way to get people to open up and talk to each other as well. There's also polling, which is great for gauging your audience's, first of all, their engagement, actually measuring that, seeing how many people are responding to polls, getting their opinions on different topics, and also gathering data from them, seeing what topics that they're interested in. And then of course there's the chat or Q&A when it comes to webinars. Those are great functions for getting specific information from individuals. One of the great uses of chat that I saw in an event that we just ran was, so our students were pitching their ideas and the audience members were submitting questions for the students. And we had a period designated where students could address those questions, but something else that was a really cool side effect was we couldn't address all the audience questions. So then afterwards, the teammates would actually answer those questions in the chat. So there was this whole other level of connectivity happening in the webinar that I thought was really cool. Additionally, I linked it here. There's a whole suite of Zoom app integrations that I didn't know about when I first was using Zoom, but it integrates with so many different platforms. So if there is not integration function on Zoom that you want to see, there's probably an app out there that does it. And then my next point is teaching them the tools. So hopefully you all noticed at the beginning of this presentation, and Christina did it already. So I love that she was also adding another layer to that. But again, expecting that folks are going to know the tools that are available to them might be a false assumption, right? So just reinforcing that information, making sure people know exactly where that button is so that they can react, and then helping them practice, right? Providing multiple opportunities for them to use those functions, use those buttons, gets them more comfortable using it, and makes the event more engaging overall. And that brings me to my last point, which is to set the tone early. You have the opportunity right at the beginning, within the first 5 seconds of your meeting, you're going to set the tone of whether it's going to be a boring, didactic, lecture-like event, or whether it's going to be interactive. So setting the tone early, encouraging your participants to speak up early is one of the best things you can do to ensure that the entire event will be interactive. Because among other things, if you have folks speaking up and talking early, that sets the tone. That gets people out of their comfort zone and into speaking up during the event, and gets people feeling more relaxed about actually hearing their voice in a virtual environment. So those are all of my tips. I'll leave it for any thoughts and final thoughts and questions we have in these last couple minutes.
All right, anybody else with some questions? Let's see, Kareem says that thanks, this is very helpful.
Yay, hi Kareem, it's so good to, well, it's nice to hear from you.
Lakeisha Thomas said that I like to be able to view participants. It's reassuring that I'm not speaking to myself. So I guess if she's a speaker, it's good to see that there's people participating.
Absolutely.
All right.
That's another advantage of a meeting versus a webinar. If you're somebody who's like, I want to be able to see the faces, big upside.
Well, this was great information. I've been writing my notes. I've taken lots of notes, and I looked at the document that you sent, and there's a lot of helpful tips and just great resources there. Thank you for providing those. Mac from McLeod says, great presentation, Lydia. It's extremely helpful, and I was telling Lydia that I had wished that I had watched this webinar 6 weeks ago. This would have been so helpful to be able to navigate through our webinar series with all of this information. But we're all in this together, so we've all, we can now compile etiquette books and stuff on. Oh, Dion is saying, thanks for joining everyone. Thanks, Lydia. Remember to avoid the murder hornets. Yes.
Especially for honeybee.
Yes, it's the 59th plague of the apocalypse. Thank you so much for being here, Lydia. This was great information. I'm so glad that we have people in our tech community that are willing to share their resources and to give to the community in such a capacity. Thank you for the work that you're doing at UAB and pouring into our future entrepreneurs. When all of this is over, I can't wait for us to be able to have these in-person meetings again. But now that we've learned some tips and tricks, this is a great way for us to create new experiences utilizing technology and, our old way of doing things. So thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I realized I didn't put my contact information on this slide or on these slides, but you can contact me. I'll be sure to put it in the resource handout that will go out afterwards. But my email is just lydiadick@gmail.com, first name, last name @gmail, no caps, no spaces. So if you want to contact me, feel free to reach out to me there. And this was such a joy to be able to come here today, talk about the subject, learn from all of you guys. So thank you so much for having me.
This has been great. We will send out your contact information to everybody as a recap with that resource that you gave us. And I just wanted to remind everybody that next week we have another Navigating the New Normal. We'll have Donnie Garvick from Two Ravens come and talk about hidden innovators. And Lydia and I actually were part of a cohort where we got to do the hidden innovators together. So it's a great program, and he's going to share this resource with companies and individuals so that going forward, you know, you can help navigate your teams with these tools. So please join us again next week. Thank you again, Lydia. And Dion, do you have any parting remarks? I decided to do it besides War Eagle.
No, I had turned off everything. I was on mute, turned the video off. No parting words except great job as always. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Great, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Great job, Lydia.
Thank you. Hidden Innovators is awesome. I'm so excited you're going to have Johnny come speak next week.
Yeah.
So what are you?
I am actually half dreamer sage, which makes a lot of sense because I tend to get a lot of ideas and then go into a research spiral and then get another idea, which is why I tend to work really well with tinkerers.
Oh, I see Ben.
Ben, I've updated you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Ben.
Just wanted to say hi.
What's up, Ben?
Hey. How are y'all? Thank you, Lydia.
Of course. Thank you for coming.
Yes, good deal. I feel like I'm invading on the your on the panelists.
Nope, you're a board member. You get access like nobody else.
Awesome. Awesome.
What is the phrase? Membership has its privileges.
Right.
So does being a board member.
There you go.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank y'all for doing this. I look forward to the next week one for sure. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah,
that one's going to be good. And we look forward to when you're going to, you and Donnie are going to co-host our staff AMA coming up on the 20th. So that
I got to figure out.
Dion.
I got to figure out how I can actually be a plus in that. You know, hitching my wagon to Donnie. I'm probably going to just be wood in his wood in the tailgate of his truck or something. I don't know that I'm going to be helping. So
no, we will prepare both of you. Don't worry about it.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all again.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye,
right.
Ben.
See ya.
Thanks again, Lydia.
Yeah, I gotta hop off, but it's so great to see you guys. It's so nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Good stuff, guys.
Another good one. Even